Yes, ma'am. That was the sound of her world. It came in layers, in tones polished by fear and habit, echoing softly across glass walls and marble floors, never too loud, never too late, always just enough to keep everything moving. Victoria Hale didn't look up when she heard it. She rarely did. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tablet in her hand, scrolling through numbers that behaved better than people ever did. Rescheduled at 2 p.m., she said, voice calm, precise. Move it to 4. And tell legal I want the revised draft before noon. Yes, ma'am. The assistant didn't hesitate. Didn't question. Didn't even blink. Victoria handed off instructions the way most people breathed, automatic, necessary, unnoticed. She stepped into the conference room, heels tapping against the polished floor in a steady rhythm that seemed to set the pace for everyone else inside. Conversations stopped. Chairs straightened. Eyes shifted. 10 people sat around the long walnut table, each one waiting, each one already prepared to agree. We're moving forward with the acquisition, she said, setting her tablet down without sitting. No delays. A man near the end of the table cleared his throat barely. There are still a few risk factors we haven't fully. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. We're moving forward. A pause. Then, softer, smaller, almost rehearsed. Yes, ma'am. It spread from one side of the table to the other like a quiet wave. Heads nodded. Pens moved. Decisions locked into place. No one argued. No one pushed back. No one asked why. Victoria finally sat, folding one leg over the other, her posture effortless, controlled. This was efficiency. This was leadership. This was how things got done. And yet, for a moment, just a flicker, something lingered in the silence that followed. Not resistance. Not tension. Just absence. She tapped her pen once against the table. Anything else? No one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because no one had learned how to say it to her. Good, she said, standing again. Then we're done. Chairs shifted as she walked out, the room exhaling behind her. In the hallway, her phone buzzed. Another request. Another decision. Another voice waiting to say yes. She answered without slowing her pace. Go ahead. On the other end, someone began explaining a scheduling conflict, their words careful, filtered, already bending toward what they thought she wanted. Victoria listened. Or at least, she heard. Handle it, she said. I trust your judgment. A lie so clean it didn't even feel like one. Because trust required something she didn't have time for understanding. She ended the call and kept walking, past offices filled with people who stood a little straighter when she passed, spoke a little softer, worked a little faster. No one stopped her. No one called her name without purpose. No one asked how she was. They didn't need to. She had everything under control. At the far end of the corridor, a maintenance cart sat half out of place, a quiet disruption in an otherwise perfect line. A man stood beside it, sleeves rolled just enough to show the work in his hands, adjusting something on the wall panel with slow, deliberate focus. He didn't look up right away. He didn't rush. He didn't move like someone trying to impress anyone. Victoria slowed, just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough to feel the difference. That shouldn't be there, she said, nodding toward the cart. Her voice carried the same expectation it always did, the one that usually ended conversations before they began. This time, there was no immediate yes, ma'am. The man finished what he was doing first. Tightened the last screw. Wiped his hands on a worn cloth. Then, and only then, he turned. It'll be gone in a minute, he said, calm, even. Not defiant. Not submissive. Just certain. Victoria held his gaze a second longer than necessary. Something about the timing. The pause. The fact that he hadn't answered first. It wasn't disobedience. It wasn't disrespect. But it wasn't what she was used to. For the first time that morning, no one had rushed to agree with her. And somehow, that small silence felt louder than every yes, ma'am, she had heard all day. The hallway did not return to normal after that moment, even though everything looked exactly the same. The cart was gone within minutes, just like he said it would be, the floor restored to its perfect, uninterrupted line, the kind of quiet precision Victoria expected from every corner of her building. But something stayed. Not visible. Not measurable. Just a shift in rhythm. She continued walking, her pace unchanged, her posture still sharp, her mind already moving ahead to the next decision waiting for her signature. Still, the absence of that immediate answer lingered longer than it should have. In her office, the glass walls framed the city like a painting that never asked questions. 50 floors above the street, everything looked smaller. Manageable. Predictable. She set her tablet down, scanned her inbox, and began issuing instructions with the same steady efficiency. Emails sent. Meetings adjusted. Deadlines reinforced. Each response came back the same way. Yes. Confirmed. Understood. No hesitation. No friction. It was seamless. It was effective. It was empty. Around noon, her assistant stepped in with a folder held carefully against her chest. The revised legal draft, she said. They incorporated all your notes. Victoria took it without looking up. Of course they did. She flipped through the pages, eyes moving fast, catching errors before most people would even find the paragraph. Halfway through, she paused. A sentence. Something slightly off. Not wrong. Just too safe. She tapped the page once. Did anyone push back on this clause? The assistant blinked. No, ma'am. Not even a question? No, ma'am. Victoria closed the folder. Send it back. The assistant hesitated, just a fraction. What should I tell them? Victoria leaned back in her chair, fingers resting lightly against the edge of the desk. The answer should have been immediate. It always was. Instead, there was a brief, unfamiliar silence. Tell them, she said slowly, to explain it to me. Not fix it. Explain it. The assistant nodded, though confusion flickered across her face before she turned to leave. As the door closed, Victoria stared at the skyline again. Explain it. The words felt unusual in her mouth, like a language she had not used in a long time. Her phone buzzed again. Another update. Another. Request. She answered, voice steady. Go ahead. The voice on the other end began listing options, each one carefully framed, each one already leaning toward what they assumed she would approve. Victoria listened. Really listened this time. Not just to the words, but to what was missing. There was no uncertainty. No perspective. No real thought. Just alignment. Stop, she said. The voice froze. Yes, ma'am. She stood, walking slowly toward the window. What do you think we should do? A pause. Longer than usual. Ma'am? Your opinion, she clarified. Not what you think I want to hear. The silence that followed was different. Not empty. Not automatic. It had weight. Somewhere in the background, she could almost hear the person searching for something real to say. It was uncomfortable. Unpolished. Honest. I think delaying might actually protect us, the voice finally said, unsure but steady. Victoria did not respond right away. Not because she disagreed, but because no one had spoken to her like that in a long time. All right, she said at last. Walk me through that. As the explanation began, slower, less certain, more human, Victoria felt it again. That same shift. The same quiet disruption she had felt in the hallway. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to make her realize something had been missing all along. And somewhere, without her noticing exactly when it happened, the sound of her world had started to change. The afternoons settled into a slower rhythm, but not a quieter one. The building still moved with precision, schedules clicking into place, voices passing information from one office to another like carefully measured currency. Yet something subtle had shifted beneath it all, like a current running just below the surface. Victoria noticed it in the pauses. In the way people hesitated half a second longer before answering her. Not out of fear. Not entirely. More like they were waiting to see if she actually wanted something different. By 3 o'clock, the legal team had returned the draft. This time, it came with notes. Not corrections. Not compliance. Explanations. She stood by her desk as they spoke, two attorneys side by side, their tone cautious, but no longer rehearsed. We kept the clause broad to avoid limiting future flexibility, one of them said, adjusting his glasses. But it also creates exposure if the market shifts faster than expected. Victoria did not interrupt. She let him finish. The second attorney added, if we narrow it here, we lose some speed, but we gain protection. Another pause. They both looked at her, waiting. Not for approval. For response. Victoria glanced down at the page, then back at them. What would you choose, she asked, if this were your company? The question landed differently than anything she had said in that room before. The first attorney blinked. The second leaned forward slightly, thinking. Protection, he said. Long term. Victoria nodded once. Then rewrite it that way. No one said yes, ma'am, this time. They simply nodded and left, already discussing options as they walked out. She watched the door close, the quiet behind it no longer empty. It had weight now. Intention. Later, as the sun lowered across the skyline, casting long reflections against the glass, Victoria stepped out of her office and walked the floor without a destination. Not a tour. Not an inspection. Just movement. People noticed. They always did. But today, something else happened. A junior analyst looked up from his desk as she passed, hesitated, then spoke. Miss Hale. She stopped. Turned. Yes. He swallowed once, then pushed his chair back slightly. I had a thought about the acquisition model. It might be nothing, but he trailed off, already bracing for dismissal. Victoria waited. Not impatient. Not encouraging. Just present. Go on, she said. The words were simple, but they held space. The analyst explained, slower at first, then gaining confidence as he realized he was not being cut off. His idea was not perfect. It had gaps, rough edges, but it was real. When he finished, the silence that followed was not fear. It was possibility. Victoria considered it. Not the way she usually did, scanning for flaws to eliminate, but listening for intent. Put it together, she said. Show me tomorrow. The analyst nodded, a small smile breaking through before he caught himself. Yes, ma'am, he said, softer this time, almost out of habit. Victoria did not react. She simply turned and continued walking. At the far end of the floor, near the service corridor, she saw him again. The same man from the morning. Daniel Brooks. His name was stitched in small, worn letters on the pocket of his uniform. He was crouched beside a panel, tools laid out with quiet order, working with the same steady focus. This time, she stopped fully. Not just a slow down. A stop. He finished tightening a connection before looking up, as if he already knew she was there. Everything running all right? She asked. The question came out different than her usual instructions. Less command. More inquiry. Daniel studied the panel for a second longer, then stood, wiping his hands on that same cloth. It will, he said. Just needs a minute. Victoria glanced at the open panel, then back at him. Does it always take this long? She asked. Daniel shook his head once. No, he said. Just when someone rushes it the first time. The answer was calm. Neutral. But it landed. Not as defiance. Not as criticism. Just truth. Victoria held his gaze for a moment, longer than necessary, longer than comfortable. No one nearby spoke. No one moved. The air felt different again. Not tense. Not quiet. Just aware. For the second time that day, she did not get the answer she expected. And for the second time, she did not correct it. The corridor remained still long after the moment should have passed, as if the building itself had paused to listen. Victoria did not move right away. She stood there, eyes briefly drifting back to the open panel, then returning to Daniel, measuring something she could not quite define. Then fix it right, she said finally, her tone steady but softer than before. It was not an order. Not exactly. Daniel gave a small nod. That is the plan, he replied, already turning back to his work, already focused again in a way that did not ask for permission to continue. Victoria watched him for another second, then turned and walked away, her steps slower now, less mechanical, as if something inside her was adjusting to a rhythm she had never followed before. By the time she returned to her office, the sun had dipped lower, painting the glass walls in warm gold that softened the sharp edges of everything inside. Her desk was exactly as she had left it. Perfectly aligned. Perfectly controlled. And yet it felt unfamiliar. She sat down, resting her hands lightly on the surface, not reaching for her tablet right away. The silence in the room was different now. It was not filled with expectation. It did not wait for her to fill it. It simply existed. Her phone buzzed again. Another update. Another voice ready to align. She stared at it for a moment before answering. Go ahead. The voice on the other end began, careful as always, offering solutions already shaped to fit what they believed she would approve. Victoria listened. Halfway through, she closed her eyes briefly. Not out of frustration. Out of recognition. She could hear it now. The pattern. The way every sentence curved toward agreement before it even reached her. Stop, she said quietly. The voice froze. Yes, ma'am. Victoria opened her eyes and looked out at the skyline, where lights were beginning to flicker on one by one. Tell me what you would do, she said. Not what you think I want. The pause that followed was longer this time. Heavier. On the other end, someone shifted, searching for footing without the usual script. I would change direction, the voice said slowly. It might cost us time, but it would make more sense long term. Victoria let the word settle. Not rushing. Not correcting. Then that is what we will consider, she said. She ended the call and set her phone down, her reflection faint in the glass beside her. For a moment, she did not recognize the woman looking back. Not because she had changed. Not yet. But because she had finally noticed something that had always been there. A space. An absence. A distance between being heard and being understood. The door to her office opened softly. Her assistant stepped in, holding a new set of documents. They rewrote the clause, she said. Based on their recommendation. Victoria nodded. Leave it. The assistant hesitated. Do you want me to summarize the changes? Victoria looked at her really. Looked this time. The way she stood. The way she waited. Always ready. Always careful. No, Victoria said. I will read it. But what do you think about it? The question caught the assistant off guard. Completely. She blinked, then glanced down at the folder in her hands, as if it might offer an answer. I think it is better, she said slowly. Safer. But it might slow things down. Victoria considered that. Then nodded once. Good, she said. That is what I needed to know. The assistant did not say yes, ma'am, this time. She simply nodded and stepped back out, the door closing gently behind her. Victoria exhaled, a quiet breath she did not realize she had been holding. Somewhere down the hall, faint but distinct, she could hear the soft clink of tools being put away. A steady rhythm. Unrushed. Certain. She stood and walked to the window, watching the city shift into night. For years, everything in her world had moved at her command. Every voice aligned. Every decision executed. It had been efficient. It had been flawless. It had also been silent in a way she had never questioned. Until now. Until a man with a worn cloth and a quiet voice had taken a second longer to answer. And somehow, that second had changed the sound of everything. The building grew quieter as the evening settled in, not because the work had stopped, but because the noise had softened into something less urgent, less performative. Lights dimmed in sections. Conversations lowered. The steady hum of productivity became something closer to a pulse. Victoria remained in her office longer than usual, not out of necessity, but because leaving felt incomplete. She stood by the window again, watching the reflection of her own office layered over the city beyond, a double image that made it hard to tell where one world ended and the other began. Her phone sat untouched on the desk behind her. For once, nothing demanded her immediate response. No one was waiting for her decision in that exact second. It should have felt like control. Instead, it felt like space. And she was not entirely sure what to do with it. A soft knock broke the stillness. She turned. Come in. It was security. Older man. Calm posture. Ma'am, he said. We are closing the east wing for the night. Just wanted to make sure you did not need access. Victoria glanced at the time. Past 7. Later than she usually stayed. No, she said. That is fine. He nodded once. Have a good night. No extra words. No forced politeness. Just simple, complete communication. Victoria watched him leave, the door closing with a quiet click that echoed slightly longer than it should have. She gathered her things slowly. Not rushed. Not delayed. Just deliberate. As she stepped out into the hallway, most of the lights had shifted to their evening setting, softer, warmer, casting longer shadows across the floor. The building felt different at this hour. Less like a machine. More like a place people had been. She walked without thinking toward the service corridor again, her steps guided by something she had not named yet. The cart was there. Parked neatly this time. Tools organized. Wiped down. Ready for the next day. Daniel stood a few feet away, finishing up, rolling a cable back into place with steady hands. He did not look surprised when she approached. He simply glanced up, then back to his work, finishing the task before acknowledging her fully. The same pause. The same rhythm. Long day, she said. The words felt unfamiliar. Not a directive. Not a question that required a report. Just an observation. Daniel secured the cable, then stood, resting one hand lightly on the cart. They usually are, he said. Victoria nodded slightly, her eyes drifting over the tools, the simplicity of them, the clarity of their purpose. Do you always take your time like that? She asked. Daniel considered the question for a moment before answering. I take the time it needs, he said. Not more. Not less. Victoria let that settle. In her world, time was something to compress. Optimize. Control. Here, it sounded different. Measured. Respected. And if someone asks you to go faster, she pressed. Daniel met her gaze, calm and steady. Then I finish faster, he said. But not better. The answer was simple. Almost quiet. But it carried something that lingered longer than the words themselves. Victoria exhaled. Softly, a breath that felt heavier than it should have. People do what I ask, she said, more to herself than to him. Daniel did not respond right away. He did not nod. Did not agree. He just stood there, giving the silence room to exist. Then, after a moment, he spoke. That is not the same as them meaning it. The hallway seemed to narrow around that sentence. Not physically, but in focus. Victoria looked at him, really looked this time, as if trying to understand not just what he said, but how he said it. There was no challenge in his tone. No judgment. Just a quiet truth, placed carefully, without force. She turned her gaze down the corridor, where the lights faded into softer shadows. For years, everything had moved exactly the way she wanted. Every answer aligned. Every action executed. It had built something powerful. Something undeniable. But standing there, in the quiet edge of her own building, she realized something she had never needed to admit before. Control had given her obedience. But it had never given her clarity. And for the first time, she was not sure which one mattered more. The night air outside the building carried a quiet that the upper floors never felt, a steady stillness that did not rush to answer anyone. Victoria stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, her reflection stretching across the polished marble as the last few employees filtered toward the exit. No one stopped her. No one interrupted. They simply moved around her, respectful, distant, efficient. The glass doors slid open with a soft mechanical hum, and for a moment, she stood there without stepping through. The city beyond moved at its own pace. Cars passed. Lights flickered. Conversations overlapped in ways that did not wait for permission. It was not controlled. It was not aligned. And yet, it worked. She stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against her skin, sharper than the filtered climate of her office. For the first time that day, there was no one watching her, no one adjusting their posture because she was near. Just people walking past, living their lives, not needing her approval to continue. It should have felt insignificant. Instead, it felt honest. Her phone buzzed again. Instinctively, she reached for it, then stopped. The screen lit up with another request, another decision waiting to be shaped. She stared at it for a second longer than usual, then slipped it back into her bag without answering. That had never happened before. Not once. She began walking, her heels quieter against the sidewalk than they had been against the marble floors upstairs. Each step felt less like a command and more like a choice. Halfway down the block, she slowed, glancing into a small cafe tucked between two office buildings. The lights inside were warm. Conversations overlapped softly. No one lowered their voice. No one paused for authority. People spoke freely, disagreed openly, laughed without permission. She stood outside for a moment, watching through the glass, something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Not envy, not longing, just awareness. She turned away and continued walking, but the image stayed with her. The next morning came early, as it always did, but something about it felt different before she even stepped into the building. The lobby greeted her the same way. Clean. Ordered. Predictable. "Good morning, Miss Hale," the receptionist said. Victoria paused. Not long. Just enough to notice the tone. Polite. Careful. Practiced. "Good morning," she replied, softer than usual. The receptionist blinked, surprised for a fraction of a second before nodding. Victoria continued toward the elevator, her reflection once again following her upward, floor by floor, until the doors opened onto the executive level. The same hallway, the same glass, the same rhythm. But this time, she heard it differently. "Yes, ma'am." It came again. From down the hall. From behind a desk. From a conversation she was not part of. The sound was still smooth. Still efficient. But now she could hear what was underneath it. Not agreement. Not always. Just completion. She walked past offices where people moved quickly, where voices adjusted mid-sentence the moment they sensed her presence. The pattern was still there. Intact. Reliable. And suddenly unmistakable. At the far end of the corridor, the service panel was closed now. Clean. Seamless. As if it had never been opened. Daniel's cart was gone. His presence erased from the visible surface of the building. But the effect remained. Victoria stopped briefly, her eyes resting on the panel before moving on. In her office, the assistant stood waiting with the day's schedule already prepared. "Your first meeting starts in 10 minutes, she said. "They're expecting your decision on the acquisition timeline." Victoria took the folder, but did not open it right away. "Do they have a recommendation?" she asked. The assistant nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They suggest moving forward immediately." Victoria looked at her. Really looked. "And what do you think?" The assistant hesitated. Longer this time. Not out of fear. Out of adjustment. "I think waiting might give us more clarity," she said carefully. Victoria held that answer for a moment. Then nodded once. "Then let us hear both sides," she said. The assistant did not say, "Yes, ma'am." She simply nodded and stepped back. As the door closed, Victoria stood still in the center of her office, the morning light cutting across the floor in sharp lines. For years, her world had been built on answers that came too quickly to question. Now, for the first time, the pauses between them were starting to matter more. And somewhere in those pauses, something new was beginning to take shape. The conference room felt different before anyone even spoke, as if the air itself had adjusted to something unspoken but understood. Victoria entered without announcing herself, her steps measured, her expression the same as always, composed and precise. But this time, she did not go straight to the head of the table. She paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to notice the way the room reacted, the way conversations stopped not because they had finished, but because they had learned to. She took her seat slowly, placing the folder in front of her without opening it. "Let us begin," she said. The presentation started immediately. Slides moved across the screen, numbers aligned, projections polished, every sentence structured to lead to one conclusion. "Move forward. Act now. Secure the advantage." The lead strategist spoke. With confidence, but there was a rhythm to it, a familiarity Victoria had never questioned before. Each point anticipated her approval before she gave it. Each argument closed itself before it could be challenged. She listened, not just to the words, but to the shape of them. When the presentation ended, the room fell into its usual silence. All eyes turned toward her, waiting for the decision that would settle everything. Victoria did not speak right away. She let the silence stay. It stretched longer than anyone expected, longer than anyone was comfortable with. A few people shifted in their seats. One person glanced down at their notes. Another adjusted their pen, waiting for the signal that would release them back into motion. "What are we not seeing?" she asked. The question landed without warning. Not part of the script. Not part of the pattern. The strategist blinked. "I am sorry? What are we not seeing?" she repeated, her voice calm, steady. "If we are wrong, where are we wrong?" The room held still. No one answered immediately. Not because they did not have thoughts, but because they had never been asked to share them this way. Victoria waited. Not impatient. Not pressing. Just present. The same way he had stood in that hallway. Finally, someone spoke. Not the strategist. Not the senior executive. A woman near the middle of the table, younger, quieter, someone who usually stayed just outside the center of the conversation. "The timeline," she said carefully. "We are assuming the market will hold for at least 6 months, but the data suggests it could shift sooner." She stopped, as if expecting to be corrected. Victoria nodded once. "Go on." The woman hesitated, then continued, her voice gaining steadiness with each word. "If it shifts earlier, we will be locked into a position that limits our flexibility. We gain speed now, but we lose options later." The strategist shifted slightly, ready to respond, but Victoria raised her hand just enough to hold the moment in place. "Thank you," she said. No dismissal. No immediate judgment. Just acknowledgement. She turned her gaze back to the table. "Anyone else?" Another pause. Shorter this time. A man near the end spoke next, offering a different concern. Then another voice joined. Then another. The room began to change. Not loudly. Not chaotically. But steadily. Opinions surfaced that had not been spoken before. Questions formed that had not been asked. The conversation moved, not in a straight line toward agreement, but in a wider circle, exploring, adjusting, understanding. Victoria sat at the center of it, not directing every word, not controlling every turn. Listening. Really listening. When the discussion settled, she looked down at the folder, then closed it without opening it. "We will delay," she said. The decision came without force, without resistance. It simply fit. No one said, "Yes, ma'am." Not immediately. They nodded. They understood. And for the first time in that room, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full. As the meeting ended and people began to gather their things, conversations continued in low voices, ideas still moving, still forming. Victoria remained seated for a moment longer, her eyes resting on the table, the reflections shifting across its surface. She could still hear it in her mind. The difference between being followed and being heard. Between answers that ended conversations and questions that opened them. And somewhere beneath it all, quiet but steady, she recognized the change. Not in them. Not entirely. In herself. The building did not return to what it had been. Not completely. The change was not loud enough to be announced, not dramatic enough to be measured, but it moved through the floors like a quiet shift in temperature. People still worked. Deadlines still held. Decisions still carried weight. But something underneath it all had loosened. Victoria noticed it in the way conversations continued after she left a room. Not rushed whispers. Not careful corrections. Just continuation. As if her presence no longer closed the space, but opened it. That afternoon, she walked the floor again, not with purpose, but with awareness. A group near the glass conference room spoke over each other, not arguing, but thinking out loud. One voice challenged another. A third offered a different angle. No one stopped when she passed. No one straightened mid-sentence. They noticed her. Of course they did. But they did not retreat into silence. Victoria slowed, just slightly, watching through the glass. The discussion was not perfect. It was not polished. But it was real. She moved on without interrupting. Further down, the junior analyst from the day before stood beside a whiteboard, sketching out his model. Two others stood with him, asking questions, pointing out gaps, adding pieces. He glanced up when he saw her, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. Victoria held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. Not approval. Not dismissal. Just acknowledgement. He returned to the board, continuing his explanation without stopping. The hallway felt different again. Not quieter. Just more alive. Near the service corridor, she paused. The cart was there again, positioned with the same quiet precision. Daniel stood beside it, reviewing a small checklist, his movements steady, unhurried. He did not look up immediately. He never did. Victoria stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "You were right," she said. The words came without build-up, without explanation. Just placed there. Daniel glanced up, his expression unchanged. "About what?" he asked. Victoria considered the question. "About the difference," she said, "between people doing what I ask and meaning it." Daniel nodded once, as if that answer did not surprise him. He set the checklist down, resting one hand lightly on the cart. "Takes time," he said. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "For them?" she asked. Daniel met her gaze. "For you," he said. The words were not sharp. Not confrontational. Just steady. Victoria did not respond right away. She let the silence sit between them, not filling it, not correcting it. For once, she did not need to. "I thought I was clear," she said after a moment. "You are," Daniel replied. Clear is not the same as understood. The hallway seemed to hold that sentence, the air around it still, as if even the building recognized its weight. Victoria looked down briefly, then back up, her posture unchanged, but something in her expression softer, less defined. "And how do you change that?" she asked. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Not careless. Just honest. You listen long enough," he said. "And you stop answering before they finish thinking." Victoria exhaled quietly, a breath that carried more than fatigue. She glanced down the corridor, where voices moved freely behind glass walls, where conversations no longer ended the moment she entered. "That is inefficient," she said, almost out of habit. Daniel gave a small, almost unnoticeable smile. "So is fixing the same mistake twice," he replied. Victoria looked back at him, holding that thought for a moment longer than necessary. Then, slowly, she nodded. Not in agreement. Not entirely. But in recognition. The kind that did not need to be spoken out loud. She turned to leave, her steps steady, her pace unchanged. But something in the way she moved had shifted again. Not toward control. Not toward command. But toward something quieter. Something that did not need to be heard immediately to be real. And somewhere behind her, the soft clink of tools being placed back into order continued, steady and certain, a rhythm that no longer felt separate from her world, but part of it. The change did not announce itself with applause or recognition, and no one marked the moment it became real. It settled quietly into the structure of the days that followed, threading itself through meetings, conversations, and the spaces in between. Victoria noticed it not in what people said, but in what they no longer held back. Ideas came earlier now. Questions arrived before decisions hardened. Silence no longer felt like an ending. It felt like space being made for something better to emerge. That morning, she entered the building the same way she always had, through the wide glass doors, across the marble floor that reflected every step with perfect clarity. "Good morning, Miss Hale," the receptionist said. Victoria paused, just for a second. "Good morning," she replied, meeting her eyes instead of passing by. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it lingered. Upstairs, the first meeting of the day began without her speaking first. That had never happened before. The team was already mid-discussion when she walked in. Voices overlapping slightly, not in chaos, but in momentum. They did not stop immediately. Not this time. One person finished their thought before the room shifted its attention toward her. Victoria took her seat without interrupting, her presence folding into the conversation instead of closing it. She listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, not preparing to correct, just listening. When they finally looked to her, expecting the decision that used to come so quickly, she did not give it right away. "What are we missing?" she asked. The question felt natural now. Not foreign. Not forced. And the answers came. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But honestly. Later, as the meeting ended and the room emptied, conversations continued in the hallway, voices still engaged, still thinking, no longer dissolving the moment she stood up. Victoria remained seated for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the table, the reflection of the overhead lights shifting across its surface. The room no longer felt like a place where decisions were delivered. It felt like a place where they were built. By midday, she found herself once again near the service corridor. Not by accident. Not entirely. Daniel was there, as he often was, working with the same steady pace, the same quiet attention to detail that never seemed rushed and never seemed slow. He did not look up right away. He never did. Victoria stopped beside the cart, her eyes resting on the neat arrangement of tools, each one placed with purpose. "It is different now," she said. Daniel finished what he was doing before responding, tightening a final connection, wiping his hands on that familiar cloth. Then he looked at her. "It is," he said. Victoria glanced down the corridor, where voices carried more freely than they once had, where movement felt less rigid, less rehearsed. "They speak more," she said. Daniel nodded. "So do you," he replied. The words were simple, but they held a quiet truth that did not need explanation. Victoria considered that, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, but her expression softer than it had been days before. "I do not speak less," she said. Daniel shook his head once. "No," he said. "You just stopped being the only one." The hallway felt still again, not empty, but full in a way it had never been before. Victoria let that settle, not rushing to respond, not needing to. For once, there was nothing to correct. Nothing to refine. Just something to understand. She gave a small nod, almost to herself, then turned to leave. Her steps were the same as always.